America is a land of great museums, and every museum has spellbinding stories to tell.
I like to always think about the museum as a giant album of history. And when you come in, you see things that relate to you.
Get to the heart of the American soul at the DuSable Museum of African American History in Chicago, Illinois. Next on Great Museums. Major funding for great museums is provided by the Eureka Foundation, dedicated to the educational power of television and new media. Exercise your curiosity. Explore America's great museums.
DuSable was founded out of necessity. It was founded in a time when we were doing I'm Black and I'm Proud.
DuSable was one of the first African American museums developed in this country.
And we're talking about 1961. We're not talking about ancient times. But in 1961, there just wasn't any institution that dealt with the experiences of people of African descent or blacks.
Now you're asking what it means to me. It means that there was a time when we didn't tell our own story.
Is African American history here to the right and non-African American history to the left, or is it all in one? And it is really all in one.
It really relates to everyone because we are part of a total America.
We think everybody in this country should know of the African American experience.
I don't know, maybe at the core of all this, somewhere there's a definitive of what is American about Americans. You know?
We're going to tell that story. We're going to keep telling that story until everybody just turns a deaf ear on us. But until that last person turns a deaf ear, we're going to tell that story.
The DuSable Museum of African American History is committed to preserving the history, culture, and achievements of African Americans.
The name DuSable came from John Baptiste Point DuSable, who was the first settler in Chicago. When I say settler, non-Native American settler. And he settled right on the branch of the Chicago River right next to what is now Michigan Avenue.
The books are still on the shelves that say that John Kinsey was the founding father of Chicago, when indeed it wasn't Mr. Kinsey, it was Mr. DuSable.
There's Kinsey Street and Kinsey Bridge and Kinsey this, but you never see anything about DuSable, and that's why we named this museum after DuSable.
The DuSable Museum of African American History was founded in 1961. In the home of Dr. Margaret Burroughs and her husband, Charles. Here on Michigan Avenue, the Burroughs and their friends and co-founders nurtured the museum for the next 12 years. Throughout the 1940s and 50s, Dr. Burroughs was driven to discover truths about the total American experience. The personal inspiration behind her tireless search for answers is revealed in her 1963 poem, "What Shall I Tell My Children Who Are Black?" I have drunk deeply of late from the fountain of my black culture, sat at the knee and learned from Mother Africa, discovered the truth of my heritage, the truth so often obscured and omitted, and I find I have much to say to my black children.
We don't just talk about African Americans, we talk about where that African part of American came from.
In a special gallery known as Africa Speaks, the spirit of Mother Africa is revealed.
So when they walk in, they hit the Africa Speaks gallery. They look around and they try to figure out, well, what does this have to do with me?
We can't say which particular country in Africa we came from, we say the continent. So what we have in Africa Speaks is a collection of faces and artifacts from the continent that tells a story about the continent. In many of the cases, the things that we have in Africa Speaks were functional, the chairs, the stools.
a leather staff from Nigeria, a chief's stool from Zaire, a grandfather's chair from Liberia, a polished wood double cup from Zaire.
One of my favorite pieces is the wood carving from Yoruba, which depicts the African family around this one particular wood-carved bowl. The bowl holds the treasures of the family. That's their safe.
The museum's valuable collection of tribal masks speaks to the integral role of art in African life. In an eerie yet beautiful way, these hollow-eyed faces represent the nameless Africans who made that first terrible voyage to what was then a strange land. Intended for use in the ritual life of the people, each mask had a special function within a tribe. This mask, with its sophisticated carved hair piled high atop its head, was used in a unique ceremonial rite of passage for young women.
That is the only known mask owned by women in all of Africa. It's a bundu mask, and it belongs to the women in Sierra Leone, the Mendi women, and the society is called the Sandy Society.
You can see the twinkle in their eyes and the excitement when they start learning about those pieces, and then see the transition from the African experience to the African American experiences.
These precious artifacts are tangible reminders of a proud heritage that belongs to all African Americans.
Sometimes treasure is not monetary. You know, sometimes treasures are things that are dear to the heart, that you want to keep, that you want to hold. That's a treasure. You can talk about all the great painters in the world, but you never hear an African American named in the great painters. But here we have some artwork that shows that African Americans are great artists.
The DuSable Museum has many treasures representing African American achievement in fine art throughout the ages. From the antebellum period, there is Edvard McGregor's portrait of William Lee, dated 1850. And Henry Osawa Tanner's 1894 painting of a French landscape, done in the Impressionist style. From the 20th century, there is Archibald Motley's 1942 Progressive America, a narrative painting, which purports to be a celebration, but includes a sharp lesson. Our nation's progress was not without a price.
You know, a lot of our art was socially motivated, and a lot of it came strictly from the soul and the beauty that we saw in this country.
In his painting, The Crisis, Charles Dawson captured the beauty of innocent children playing together on the street.
African American history cannot exclude whites. Whites were there. This is a bunch of kids that are sitting on a school ground or a playground somewhere shooting marbles. And it shows that, hey, you can play together. You know, you can always be together. And that's what they're doing in The Crisis. They're playing together, and one kid is losing his marbles. That last marble, it's all over with.
Another of the museum's many treasures is the remarkable bas-relief mural, Freedom Now, by Robert Whit Ames. The intricate wood carving speaks to the painstaking task of creating it, but its true beauty lies in its complex narrative.
It's really a piece that has to be studied.
Ames, though he was white, beautifully captured the drama of the African American experience.
The Ames mural is definitely one of those that you want to go ooh about.
And what he wanted to do was tell the story of the African American experience from Africa through the civil rights movement. That's the story that he tells, and by looking at the mural, you can follow it, the storyline all the way across the mural, all the way up to the top.
Ames begins the story on the shores of Africa.
It shows a family that's getting water and preparing and standing around, and the next scene you see they're on a slave ship coming to America.
The arrival into the America is a scene that I hold dear, because that's where I moved from saying that we're all foreigners in birth.
Not all Africans who came to America prior to the Civil War came in bondage. But for those who did, life in America often began on the auction block.
And then off to the left is the wife and the child. And so after he's gone, then she and the child will be brought up, and they might even be sold separately too.
A subtlety lost on many viewers of Ames' masterpiece is the second child, a white child, witnessing the auction from the balcony above.
And she is the continuum. She's the one that's being taught and introduced into the lie, that her position is up there and ours is down there, that she somehow is better than the others. She points to the fact that this is going to last and go on. It's going to be retained.
It would take the collective efforts of many people over the next century to triumph and to achieve real freedom.
He proves that indeed a picture's worth 1,000 words. The exhibit is based on material that has been created about us as a people. It is primarily created to sustain racist views about black people.
It's important because it's a part of our history, and we cannot deny that either.
We call it distorted images made in USA because historically they come out of that American experience.
The broad-faced and smiling Aunt Jemima, one of the most successful branded images ever created, was introduced in 1893 at the Chicago Exposition as a real person.
Her name was Nancy Green. He dressed her up and he said, "This is Aunt Jemima. She's going to show you how to make pancakes, the self-rising pancakes and so forth." And it stuck.
The first response, black and white, is to chuckle and to laugh because we've been conditioned to respond like that to these images.
A generation into the 20th century, the names of these fictional characters were as familiar, or perhaps even more familiar, than those of real African-American heroes.
And in isolation, you can deal with it as a novelty. But then when you see it all together, you begin to realize how this material, subliminal, how it's very effective. The sheet music that we have, 10 Little Niggers, it was a Christmas gift, and it has a date.
For Willie, from his Aunt Jenny, Christmas 1875.
And at Christmas time, can you imagine everybody gathering around the piano, and they're going to learn a song about 10 little niggers, and the word itself is bad enough, but then the lyrics talk about these people as being so stupid. It affects our own sense about ourselves. I mean, it's really very potent material. It is not something just to, just to take casually.
And what's the good part of it? What's the upside? Some people see that as a half glass empty, and I have to look at it as a glass half full. It shows that we existed and how we existed in the minds of others.
Across the hall from these fictional figures, the exhibit, Songs of My People, is an extraordinary and historic photo documentary of the world of African Americans as seen by African Americans. It's a stunning self-portrait of everyday life.
Ours is the first voice, you know, and that first voice is so important.
Reach in your pocket, pull out a coin, and I'll guarantee you there's two sides to that coin. And that's what we have down here. We have songs of my people here. We have distorted images here. They can see how distorted images does not portray true African American living. Like I said, every coin has two sides to it, and this is our coin downstairs.
You see a grandmother doing the hula hoop. You remember the hula hoop? And she's doing those. She's showing even she's a kid at heart. We're talking about everyday life there. And so the children can identify with that.
You know, church going, Sunday, go to meeting, you see the good times that they had, how the family worked together, how they worked, how they excelled in sports, how they excelled in medicine, how they excelled in family life. Actual photographs with people living.
Each photo is a beat in the rhythm of a song, yet unfinished.
The one that strikes me the most, it's this man's arm, this black arm, with a cowrie shell bracelet holding this little child. And the contrast of the skin tone is a fantastic black arm, and it's juxtaposed against the whiteness of the cowrie shell, and then the delicate child. My goodness, that piece is so good.
Everyone that went through high school, they went to prom. Making sure that the gown was perfect, making sure the tuxedo was right, making sure that the flowers were purchased, making sure everything was right. I'm standing here reading that story, and I said, man, that's home. That hit home.
You'll see a picture of two parents hugging and showing the emotion and the proudness they have. I think Jesse Jackson Jr. is actually kissing Reverend Jackson in celebration, and they're hugging him and showing the joy of his accomplishments. So that picture is one of my favorites.
Songs of My People is true. It's real.
It's an exhibit that shows how much we're the same, but yet we're different, and that value of that difference.
Perhaps no art form expresses the African American story quite like the blues, a musical tradition born over 150 years ago in the cotton fields of the Mississippi Delta.
They would sing songs about losing their woman. They would sing songs about having empty stomachs. They would sing songs about working hard.
The simplicity and sensuality of the blues make it more than just music. It's a spiritual experience for all involved, which may be why it's still popular, still powerful.
The people then were really striving hard, and people now, African American now, are still striving hard. So the blues is still there. You still hear it. It may not be the quote down home blues that you heard in the past, but the blues is still there, believe me.
And the business of the blues is a huge success story. Blues icon B.B. King has recorded over 70 records and toured for decades with his lady, his guitar, Lucille. Even the queen of the blues, Coco Taylor, said she started her professional life in Chicago with nothing but 35 cents and a box of Ritz crackers. Born in Tennessee as Cora Walton, she used to sneak out back and play the blues on her homemade instruments. An early love of chocolate earned her the nickname Coco. It stuck.
But it's the sparkle in her eyes that I really enjoy. And her attire, she's a wonderful dresser. She gets into her music, and you can see that she still has the enthusiasm for the blues.
Singer-songwriter Keb Mo has performed for the late-night audiences of Letterman and Leno and played to sold-out crowds across the nation. In many ways, the blues is as much about triumph as it is about trials and tribulations, a truth captured by the photography of Jeff Dunas.
If you look at all the eyes, and if you really look deep into the faces, you can see these are individuals. They have a common thread because they truly loved what they did.
What they did was revolutionize popular music. The blues is the heart and soul of rock and roll.
We're at the changing helm state of our history. So we're passing a history on to the next generation here at DuSable. So we have to make sure that we have used everything that we can to ensure that the recording of that history is in place.
Yet the DuSable Museum of African American History is not really about the past. It's about the future.
This is a time capsule in itself. We have to make sure our young people know the value of the institution.
In celebrating the achievements of ordinary individuals who dared to excel, the museum does not overlook the leaders.
There is a danger, however, because we don't want to end up just talking about those people that have made a name for themselves. Let's take Dr. King. If you isolate him and you talk about him and what he did and not include all of those nameless people, then you come up with a guy who somehow did all of this by himself.
So the museum also talks about the lesser-known stories. Major Robert Lawrence, the nation's first black astronaut, or Bessie Coleman, the first African-American pilot.
Just imagine her as a little girl and trying to say, what do you want to be? I want to be a pilot.
Prior to, I'd say probably 1985, 1980, nobody knew who Bessie Coleman was. And out at O'Hare Airport here in Chicago, they named the street Bessie Coleman Street, and people said, who is Bessie Coleman? Now they know who Bessie Coleman is.
And now people know about the World War II legends, the Tuskegee Airmen.
As a matter of fact, of all the sorties that they flew, and of all the cover that they flew protecting the bombers, they never lost one bomber in combat. Now, there is no other group in World War II that can claim that, but the Tuskegee Airmen can.
Well, that one really is an eye-opener, too, for non-black people. I think that it's vital that present-day generations know that even our armed forces were segregated. So in this war that this country played such a key role, you've got a segment of its population who are demanding to be given the right to participate.
Now, you see, how can that relate to present day living in the United States?
Well, it's primary because it's the reason we're here.
To encourage young people to aspire.
And we want African Americans to see what people went through to get those aviation licenses. It's the same thing you're going to go through now to get your engineering degree, your medical degree, whatever.
The sky's the limit.
I'm hoping this is a story we get to them, is that as a kid, when you grow up, you're going to have to fight for what you want. You're going to have to compete. Nothing's going to be handed to you on a silver platter. You're going to have to compete.
Harold Washington had to compete to become Chicago's first African-American mayor. But he didn't do it alone.
His election was really challenged. It was challenged by fear.
Chicago was considered one of the most segregated cities in the North. It was more segregated than some of the cities in the South.
This city elected an African-American mayor. Who's to think that that would ever happen?
The museum's exhibit on Washington covers his journey from the Illinois State Legislature to the United States Congress and home again, to City Hall in Chicago.
Harold Washington, I think, is destined to become a folk hero.
We don't want to just show our exhibition to African Americans. We want to spread it out. The Bessie Coleman story is out there now. The Tuskegee Airmen story is out there. So many other stories are coming out. And for the American people, the general American people, to understand African American history, that's what we have to do. We have to bring those things out and let people know what it's all about.
I like to always think about the museum as a giant album of history. And when you come in, you see things that relate to you.
I brought my son and some of his friends into the museum a year or two ago. And the comment that they made when they walked out was, I didn't know that. And that's the comment that we hear a lot. I didn't know that.
as they say, the children shall lead us, they can go home and talk about the wonderful visit they had at the DuSable Museum.
When they talk like that, then they learn something. And you know what? They'll be back.
Learn more about America's great museums at greatmuseums.org. To order this episode or another, call 1-800-593-4420 or visit greatmuseums.org. Museums hold the treasures and tell the tales of the people and places that make America great. Funding for great museums is provided by the Eureka Foundation, dedicated to the educational power of television and new media. Exercise your curiosity. Explore America's great museums.